everybody, I'm Bree the Plant Lady, and today I want to talk to you about compost. Very specifically, I want to give you some guidance for the questions that you need to be asking your local compost supplier before you make a major investment. As gardeners, we're really never satisfied with the soil that we are given by nature, and that's why we go to such great efforts to improve the areas in which we cultivate plants. You know, I think it's fair to say across the country that you have people saying, oh, my soil is too dry, or it's too wet, or it's heavy compacted clay, or in my case, it's sand like being at the beach. So we'll never really be satisfied, and that's why we go to great efforts to purchase quality compost to make our gardening experience better. But what happens when you buy bad compost? So my first recommendation for naturally improving the soil is free and really simple. Leave the leaves. It's literally in their name. Stop blowing your leaves to the street, stop burning them, and start mowing them and putting them back into your garden beds. In fact, I recommend stealing the leaves from your neighbors, especially if they aren't into gardening. Leaves are the easiest way to improve your soil over time. They break down, adding organic matter, and help feed the natural microbes that are in your native soil. If you see here, I've been layering leaves in this bed for a decade, and what I have now is a nice, rich, black organic matter, very similar to the soil that I grew up with in Michigan. No sand to be seen here, all thanks to the leaves that we chop up and put into this bed every single fall. As I was recently explaining in a garden tour video, the sadness that the death of this flamethrower redbud has brought up some really tender feelings about some of my past compost purchasing experiences. And I would love to be able to help guide you to avoid the mistakes that I have made in the last 10 years as I have been developing this property. If only I had known the questions that needed to be asked so that I could hold my compost supplier responsible when I purchased subpar products. And that's what I want to help you with today. So question number 1, what is the compost made from? If your soil supplier can't give you that answer, you absolutely need to find somewhere else. The reason that this is so important is because all compost is different. It matters. Was it from a cow, from a chicken, from a turkey, from a horse? Is there any green material mixed in to ensure that it's going to be better draining? Because remember, animal manure can be very heavy. There's also some extremely important aspects of understanding what animal the manure is from so that you can better understand the potential risk that you have for purchasing killer compost. I know, killer compost sounds completely crazy and made up, but the thing is, it's not. And it's a reality that we face now more than ever before. So when I was doing research for writing my second book, Gardening with Grains, I discovered a lot of information about the reality that grain farmers face. Now, this is not a judgment, okay? I'm just gonna give it to you straight so that you have a better understanding of the reality of the world that we live in. So most of the grain that is grown, particularly in, regions like the Southeast, isn't going ultimately for direct to human consumption. It's often grown for, biofuels, but also for animal feed. Now, in areas that get a lot of spring rainfall or, might be cool, farmers have started using persistent herbicides. They spray them on the fields so that the fields will dry evenly, making harvest more efficient. All of that is super logical. Now, it's really important here to make the distinction. Persistent herbicide is not Roundup. Roundup is not the enemy with regard to the killer compost idea, because Roundup, if they were using Roundup, we actually wouldn't have the killer compost. See, There's all gray area. There's nothing black and white when you really start learning about, the science, the economy, and the relevance of how all of this shakes out. All right, so back to killer compost. Animals eat the grains that have been sprayed. But those persistent herbicides don't actually decompose in their digestive process. In fact, many of these herbicides will remain active for 5 to 8 years. So what happens when an animal eats hay that has been treated with an herbicide in the field? Well, their manure gets utilized in a compost facility, you buy it, and all of a sudden all of your plants look like they've been sprayed with an herbicide. Most people like to blame their neighbor's lawn care company. I can't tell you how many times I have gotten an email with pictures and they're blaming, True Green. The reality is you bought that. Your supplier should know better, but there isn't really a regulatory system for compost. So, if this happens to you, you need to report it. You need to, first of all, alert the company that you bought it from. You also need to let your local extension agent know. Now, how can you avoid buying killer compost? Actually, it's a really simple solution. Go to the supplier, get a 1-gallon bucket full, and sow a couple of bean seeds in it. If the bean seeds germinate in a weird way, like they look chlorotic, or their foliage is kind of curled and weird, that's the sign that that compost still has active herbicide in it. Don't buy it. Don't make the investment and start spreading it all over your yard. That's the easiest solution for making sure that you make a wise purchase. But remember, if you have purchased compost in the past that you suspect may have compost or may have herbicide active in it still, it's really important that you report this, because if you don't, it's going to continue being sold to other people who ultimately blame themselves and say that they have a black thumb when it had nothing at all to do with your ability to garden. So the next question you need to ask is, how old is this compost? And that's a really, really important inquiry. Because you see, when compost isn't fully decomposed, it actually will be hot in temperature. That will ultimately burn the plants that you try to grow in it. Now, suppliers shouldn't be selling compost that isn't ready to be planted in, and yet they do. Now, it's also really important to know that it's aged well and fully decomposed. That way you can be assured that it's not going to rob nitrogen from all of the plants in your garden as it starts to decompose further. So understanding the age of your compost is a really critical component to making a wise decision about what you're purchasing. Another important part about choosing a compost is getting your hands in it and actually feeling the texture. So what you're looking for is a compost that holds moisture but also can crumble easily. The important part about understanding soil: plant roots grow in the airspace between soil particles. I'm going to repeat that. The roots of plants grow in the airspace between soil particles. So this means you don't want to have a heavy compacted compost, because that is not going to stimulate healthy root development. So always get your hands in that compost before you make a purchase. So another thing that you should be doing that you probably aren't is to actually give your compost a sniff. In the case of Soil Cube, it really doesn't have any scent at all, which is the indication that this is really great, ready for me to be planted in. Now, if it has a strong scent, kind of like a sewer, that means it's not decomposed, so it's not ready for you to be planting it. That being said, I encourage you to find a compost that's derived of a lot of different mixed ingredients. Ground up leaves are a wonderful addition. In addition to animal manures, decomposed grass clippings. Also, you can use like wheat straw that hasn't been treated with a persistent herbicide. If you want to make your own compost, that's an entirely different experience. But when you're going to look for a compost supplier to purchase it from, it's really important that you understand what all of the ingredients are that are being used to make that compost, and that it's well drained, it's disease and weed seed free, and that it's also not going to be too heavily compacted, and that it's fully decomposed. But how do you know if your compost is free of weed seeds? Now, this is a significant challenge, and I can tell you from experience that I have bought a lot of compost that was filled with noxious weeds, specifically nutsedge. That was actually what led me to find Soil Cube, because they guaranteed that it would be weed seed free. Now, that process is all about understanding how the compost was made. In the case of Soil Cube, the compost is in large windrows and it's heated to 160 degrees. That kills off any potential seedlings that could germinate. Now, in reaction to heating their compost so high, they add microbes after the fact when they are in the bagging phase. That way the soil is alive and ready to be planted in when it lands on your property. Another great thing to ask is to see if the compost has had any microbes added to it. Now, last year, before the pandemic, I was in an amazing talk with a professor from the University of Florida. She was explaining that last century was all about the chemistry revolution, but the era that we're living in now is all about the advanced science related to microbiology. So it's no different than you needing to have microbes in your body to be able to efficiently digest food. Soils teeming with microbes have been proven to create a better gardening experience. How does that shake out? Well, it ultimately makes your plants more disease and insect resistant. It also allows your plants to naturally absorb nutrients from the soil, allowing them to grow more efficiently, and they become better at withstanding the climate extremes of really wet or really dry. So always ask to see if your compost has had microbes added to it so that your gardening experience will be the best possible. So my years of experience have taught me to stick with a product that you love and support that company. And that's what's led me to using Soil Cube. Now, the problem is that Soil Cube isn't distributed everywhere. And trust me, I wish it was. It would make my life so much easier. So I often get the question, you live outside of their range of distribution, what soil should you buy? And the truth is, I can't answer that question because I don't live in your region. My best advice is to check with other gardeners. Get involved with a master gardener community, ask your local extension agent, go visit local independent garden centers and see what products they're recommending. That's going to be the easiest way to source quality compost so that you will have the best success for the area that you are growing in. Now look, this is not a Soil Cube commercial, but I have to give them a shout out because that product is the reason that my garden is so lush and beautiful 12 months out of the year. I'm super grateful to have access to that product. More than anything, I'm sharing this advice with you to help prevent you from making some of the mistakes that I have made over the years. Get to know your compost supplier, support them when they have a quality product, tell others about it. But if your compost supplier can't answer the questions that you ask, it's really important that you recognize there are better products available somewhere else. So I appreciate you watching this video. Please like and subscribe, and I thank you so much for watching today. Best of luck in your garden and finding quality compost.